Hey everyone, I'm still recovering right now, but my throat seems to be getting worse. It hurts to breathe, let alone move my mouth too much. Thankfully, some very amazing and kind people offered to help me out today, so give a huge thanks to them. They are Being Scared, Swamp Dweller, Solitary Wendigo, Sadimir of Project Imminent Death, and Malum. So be sure to click the links below to subscribe to them and show your appreciation. Also, this episode will not have an outro. And one last thing, remember that you can share your stories at darkstories.org or reddit.com/r/darknessprevails. Thank you. Now let's begin. Mana Pulls Skinwalker from Dr. White Rabbit. This is a story from Africa, and most likely the only Skinwalker story from there. My uncle, cousin, and myself tried to go to Mana Pools often, as we don't like the generic game parks, such as the Kruger National Park in South Africa, that all the tourists go to. Plastic and fake with all the fences make us feel caged. Now, we've all been going into the bush for years, and most likely we'd be out there for months or years without giving it much thought, if it weren't for life and work. The bush is our home away from home. Mana Pools in Zimbabwe is special on its own though. You have lions and elephants walking through your camp. There are cabins as well, but we prefer the campsites. The one time we had a Nile croc take a zebra down not more than 20 meters from our campsite, it was awesome. It's the real Africa, not the Africa you see on your local travel guides or TV. This happened when we took our friends from the States to show them the real bush. As always, I took my hammock with me, along with my Ott 375 rifle and a Colt 1911. I still need to protect myself from hippos and things after all. Once we got there to the campsite and we had to set up, I then went for a walk looking for tracks for our friends from across the Great Lake. I didn't see anything bad. A few lions, a cheetah, zebra, and an elephant, all of which had come across our campsite but didn't really care. Cool, I thought. My friends might just have a fright of their life tonight if anything like those came back. I kept walking around when I saw these other tracks in the sand. They were odd. Maybe about 30 centimeters long and 15 wide. They looked almost human, but with more feline traits. My uncle came from behind me and asked if I had found anything good. I showed him the prints I was looking at, asking if he recognized them. He shrugged at me and said it's probably just a big baboon. We laughed it off and walked back to camp, though I have to admit, the tracks were still on my mind. The week was pretty uneventful. We saw some guys downriver fishing, but they were so far from us that we didn't bother with them. On day 5, I went paddling downriver to find a good fishing spot. Drifting down, I saw some hippos and some lions on the riverbank. They didn't look right, almost like they were scared. This was also odd. Their behavior was far from normal. I ended up where we saw the other camp not too long ago, and I paddled to shore. The guy who greeted me looked quite shaken. I jokingly asked if this was their first time out here. They said yeah, and said that they were leaving tomorrow, as apparently then their car would be fixed, because some animal had wrecked the engine. I said sorry, then changed the subject, asking if the fish were biting here. He looked at me with a pale expression on his face and said it was time to leave. The way he looked and acted in that moment, it sent shivers down my spine. When I got back to camp, I was telling my uncle about this. He looked at me and said, "Yeah, mana isn't for everyone. You never know what's around you." I asked him what he meant, and he replied, "Those strange tracks you found. You see, I've never seen them before." Great, I thought. Now he tells me. I jump into my truck and go on a game drive, taking my friends with me. My friend's sister is quite uptight and is kind of scared on this trip. I'm telling her there's nothing to panic about. She's not going to get eaten out here. But it doesn't seem to help. We carry on talking and trying to lighten the mood. She suddenly changes the subject and asks us if we had seen that big animal last night. I look at her confused, but answer confidently, saying we are in the bush after all, and seeing any large animal like that wasn't exactly paranormal. I told her not to worry though. We had plenty of firepower, and we could take down most anything out here. Night soon rolled around again. We were all sitting around the campfire telling scary stories of the bush, about monsters in the African bush. I noticed that the people downriver were suddenly running frantically away from something. We stop our stories for a moment. I look through my scope, and what I saw out there will forever haunt me. There was this creature, about 3 to 4 meters tall. It was squeezing one of the men's throats so hard, it bent and molded around the claw like wet Play-Doh. I felt too sick to continue watching, too terrified. I put down the rifle, and I told everyone as calmly as I could that we needed to leave. I turn around and see my uncle loading things into the truck. My cousins and friends are running around grabbing things as well, while the girl is shaking. We needed to leave before that thing saw us. Within minutes, everyone was mostly packed when we heard a branch break nearby. Everything went dead silent as the entire group stayed completely motionless. There was a palpable, textured dread in the air around us. It's funny how the lack of any sort of sound makes such real fear apparent. When the inhuman cry came from the nearby forest, we all panicked, clambering into the truck and driving away as fast as possible, following along the riverbank. By morning, we ran into some park rangers who thought we were poachers, but we de-escalated the situation and told them what had happened. Later on, we heard that the only thing they found that was left of the other people's camp was torn up supplies. They think that the people that were there had already escaped and that it seemed to be a sort of lion attack. But both of those claims were probably wrong. I saw that thing. I saw how it was choking that man's throat. One thing is certain, I'll never go to the same part of that park. I'm not risking my life just to hunt and camp.
I recently moved into a big house, just temporarily. It's kind of a complicated situation. The house belongs to a family member. They were going to be gone for a few months, that sort of thing. I was going to be there on my own, so obviously I thought, what if it's haunted? There wasn't anything in the house when I moved in. There is now. I was in the main hallway unpacking some stuff when the doorbell rang. That put me on edge right away because the house is at the end of a long driveway and kind of out of the way. You have to go looking for it. There was an old woman at the door. This was in broad daylight, but there was still something kind of off about her. She was really tall, like a full head taller than me, and I thought there was something weird about the way she looked. It was like none of her clothes fit her properly. She took my hand and smiled really wide and told me that she was from the neighborhood council or something like that, and asked if she could come in and talk to me. My gut reaction was to say no, but I couldn't really think of a reason to. She was just an old woman. What was she going to do? I really wish I had just slammed the door in her face. I brought her into the living room, and she sort of tottered behind me, like her feet didn't fit into her shoes properly. She sat down without asking and grinned at me until I took a seat across from her. For about a half a minute, she didn't say anything, just smiled and stared at me while it got increasingly awkward. Just as I was about to break the silence, she fished in her pocket and pulled out this really big, old-fashioned sweet, the type that comes in that see-through wrapping.
"Here,"
she said.
"Eat this."
I should probably point out here that she spoke really quietly, so it was difficult to hear anything she said. I accepted the sweet, kind of taken back, and unwrapped it. It was dark red, almost black. I popped it in my mouth because she was still grinning at me and nodding her head. Have you ever walked around behind a supermarket where they keep the big bins? They throw meat that's gone bad in those bins. Imagine that rancid smell, but on a hot summer day. It's so thick you can almost feel it in the air. That's what this sweet tasted like. I almost spit it out onto the floor, but wanting to be nice made me chew the thing and force it down my throat. The woman was talking all the time, but between the taste and her quiet voice, I barely heard her. My mouth tasted like rotten meat, so I politely told her I was going to go get some water and ran into the kitchen. When I came back, she was gone. I had been in the kitchen for less than 30 seconds. My first reaction probably should have been to assume that she went to the bathroom or had to leave in a hurry. Instead, I searched the entire house. I went through every single room, convinced I was going to open a closet or look under a bed and see her stuffed in there, grinning at me. That didn't happen, obviously, but I was still extremely on edge as the sun started to go down. I felt like I was turning off the light in my bedroom after spotting a giant spider in there. That night, I propped a chair against my bedroom door because I just couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was still in the house somewhere, hiding. I woke up at around 2 a.m. and heard creaking floorboards downstairs. It was an old house and unfamiliar. I kept telling myself that until the noises stopped. When I woke up the next morning, there was a red sweet on the living room table. I'll tell you the same thing I told the police. No, I can't be absolutely certain that the sweet wasn't there the day before. Maybe I had just overlooked it, but I didn't think so. They told me that the organization the woman claimed to come from didn't actually exist and clearly thought I was wasting their time. After they left, I searched the entire house again, and then the grounds. Then I searched them again. By the time I was finished, I had managed to calm down a bit and looked at the situation rationally. The woman probably left the suite there the previous day, and I just didn't notice. I had searched the whole house twice now. There was nowhere she could possibly be hiding. She was probably just some doddery old lady who wandered off while I was in the kitchen. As I prepared to go to bed, I had managed to fully delude myself into thinking nothing strange was going on. I decided not to do anything childish like blocking my door, because what was I afraid of? Even if she somehow was still inside the house somewhere, what was she going to do? At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up abruptly, knowing in the back of my mind that something was wrong. I guess I must have heard something in my sleep. I turned over onto my side and reached out to turn on the bedside lamp, groping around because I was in an unfamiliar room. When the light came on, I saw the old woman standing right next to my bed. I only got a glimpse of her because as soon as I screamed, she scuttled backward out of the door really fast. I only got the briefest glimpse of her before she vanished into the unlit hallway outside my door. I now believe that the human brain has a special compartment for dealing with experiences far outside of the realm of the natural. If I had woken up to find a burglar in my room, I probably would have gone numb with panic. If there was a lion at the foot of my bed, I would have been too paralyzed with fear to do anything. But as soon as the woman was gone, that special compartment took over. I jumped out of bed and slammed the door shut, then shoved a chair up against the handle, and then dashed for my phone. No signal, no internet. I later found out there was nothing wrong with the phone or the local service. I think that she was interfering with it somehow. The drop from the bedroom window wasn't too high. If I landed just right, I would probably avoid injury. But what if I sprained an ankle or broke my leg? I had a sudden vision of pulling myself across the dark garden while the woman sprinted after me, and decided I didn't want to risk it. That gave me two options: wait out the night in my bedroom, or try to get out of the house now. I went for the second one. I was thinking that my flimsy barricade wouldn't hold if the woman decided she wanted back in. I broke one of the chair legs off and crept slowly into the hallway, reaching carefully for the light switch. When I pressed it, the lights came on for a second and then faded out. I flicked the switch a few more times. Nothing. Some gut instinct told me she was sabotaging them somehow. I used my phone for light as I slowly, quietly crept along the upstairs hallway and down the stairs. The light barely traced the shapes of the walls and the dark, yawning frames of open doorways. I jumped at every single shadow and unidentifiable shape, certain that at any second that grinning face would appear out of the shadows. I got downstairs and to the front door. I had double locked it and put the chain in place. Just as I was reaching for the first lock, I heard rapid, uneven footsteps at the top of the stairs, approaching swiftly. I undid the first lock. A high-pitched shriek came from halfway down the stairs, and I screamed as I undid the second lock and wrenched the door open. It stuck fast. I had forgotten the chain. I glanced behind me and saw the tall, spindly shape of the woman half running, half falling down the stairs toward me, her head lolling backward and her mouth hanging open. I can't even remember getting the chain off. I might actually have just yanked the door open so hard I broke it. In any case, the last I saw of the woman was her face, inches away from me, as I slammed the door shut. I sprinted to the nearest house and eventually they called the police, possibly because I was half delirious with fear and babbling incoherently. The police once again failed to find anything unusual. It's been a week. I'm staying at a friend's place, sleeping with the lights on and the bedroom door barricaded. The house's real owners aren't back yet. I'm not sure what I'm going to tell them, but I have to stop them from going back there, somehow. This isn't a haunting. It's an infestation. I can't stop thinking about all of the holes in our defenses, the windows and doors left open, the strangers invited into our living rooms. I just hope to God it's the house that she wanted, and not me.
So I grew up in South Jersey, very close to the Pine Barrens. The Pine Barrens are basically a stretch of wilderness across southern New Jersey that holds a huge aquifer underneath it. The aquifer exists because the soil is extremely sandy, allowing for rapid draining of rainwater into the aquifer below. People here have no doubt that the Jersey Devil is real. So much so that part of the Pine Barren unit in 6th grade science included the legend of the Jersey Devil, what he probably looks like, and different significant sightings that people in the area have seen over the years. You know, typical public school learning. All of the Jersey Devil talk peaked when we went to Mount Misery for our 6th grade class trip. Basically, we spent 3 days in the heart of the Pine Barrens with our teachers and classmates cabin camping. We did a ton of random nature stuff, but everything came to a head on the last night there. The grade was split into 3 groups that would rotate through 3 different activities: ghost stories, s'mores, and a hayride. My group went through the activities in this exact order. The ghost stories were pretty lame. They were told by one of the English teachers and was definitely meant to freak us out a little bit. None of the stories mentioned the devil at all, though. The sun began to set as we made some s'mores for our second activity. Both of the other groups got to experience the hayride during the day, but by the time we got it, the sun had fully set. Our group loaded into the back of the hayride, which consisted of a tractor pulling a large trailer filled with hay and straw. A couple teachers joined the group, with my homeroom teacher sitting 3 people away from me, towards the front of the trailer. The tractor turned its headlights on, and we were off into the woods. Honestly, there wasn't much to see. We traveled down some sandy dirt road surrounded by trees in the pitch-black darkness. This went on for about 10 or so minutes until we finally came out to a clearing. The clearing can best be described as a bunch of sand dunes, not uncommon for the Pine Barrens, with a small pool of water at the lowest point between a couple of the dunes. The tractor pedaled along across the side of the clearing towards the dirt on the other side. Everything was fine until one of the kids on the side closest to the pool of the water shouted, "What's that thing over there drinking out of the water?" We all rushed over to look, and saw what looked to be a deformed deer. It was drinking out of the water like any other deer would, but it looked like it had long scratches along its side and had weird deformities sticking out of its back. I could see how someone could mistake these for wings, but it looked more like a strange, large black growth to me. My first thought was this was something like a teacher trying to scare us or something. After all, we literally learned about the Jersey Devil like 2 weeks prior, and we just listened to a bunch of ghost stories about an hour ago. My opinion was changed when I saw the panic in my homeroom teacher's eyes. She pushed me and a couple of other kids away from that side of the trailer and frantically was yelling at the tractor guy to speed up. She tried to hide it, but I saw her wipe tears away throughout the rest of the ride. I never got to see if that deer thing reacted to us because my teacher was holding me down away from the ride. The driver gunned it, and the teachers towards the back of the trailer frantically scanned the woods behind us with flashlights for the rest of the ride. When we got to the camp, half of us rolled out of the trailer with laughter. Surely this was a prank that the teachers put on for all the groups, right? But after talking to the other kids, we realized we were the only ones that saw this creature. I paid close attention to my teacher, and saw her pull a couple of other teachers aside and they exchanged frightened looks as she told them what we saw. My sister went on the same class trip 2 years later and they didn't even do the hayride activity at all. This happened years ago, but I've never been able to shake that encounter. The closest thing I've seen to what I saw was when Paranormal State tried to find the Jersey Devil themselves. They captured an image of a weird-looking deer on thermal cameras. I don't know if it's the Jersey Devil, but they definitely saw the same freaked-up thing that I did. Before I start, I should mention that I am half white, half Mexican male, and this story happened to me when I was 17 years old. My family went to California for a summer vacation, and to see the family we have out there. That year, we decided to go camping in a certain park in Northern California for a few days, and being a Phoenix native, it was a much-needed break from the 120-degree heat. All was good for the first few days, until the second to last night there. A group of 5 to 6 of us were sitting by the campfire at 1 in the morning, when we noticed the forest goes dead silent around us. As we all look around at each other, questioningly, we hear the pained, blood-curdling scream of a woman saying, No, ring from the trees to the left of our camp. Not knowing what was wrong or what was going on, we kept our ears open and stayed on guard. A few moments later, we hear the same noise again, but somehow different. More inhuman this time. Like a voice being played off of a speaker. We instantly recognized it as the voice of the woman from before. Horrified, we quietly all went to our tents to hide. Eventually, we all fell into a very uneasy sleep. I jolted awake at 3 in the morning, desperately needing to pee. Thankfully, we were across from the outhouses, so after a quick sprint over into the outhouses and relieving myself, I hear what sounded like scratching on a tin metal roof. I immediately froze, remembering the inhuman howl from earlier that night, hoping they weren't related. Armed with only my phone, I watched the next half an hour tick down, either waiting for the sun to rise or for the sound of the scraping to stop. Suddenly, the light in the bathroom cut out. The timer for the lights had gone out, leaving me in the dark. With the faintest bit of light threatening to peek its head over from the horizon, I decided to make my break back to the tent. I made it across the dirt road to the camp when I heard it again. That woman's shriek, but not loud. It had the same intensity and inhuman artificialness, but It was like barely a whisper. Foolishly, I turned around and perched on the metal roof. I saw was a 7-foot, pale gray creature with 3-inch claws on all fours and deep sunken eyes staring at me a mere 25 feet away. Its flesh was tightly stretched across its bones. It was completely hairless and lacked any form of genitalia. I was frozen solid as we looked at each other until it took to its right and saw the light creeping up. It stared at me and let out one more agonizing cry that had me haunted till this very day. It sent one last soul-stabbing stare before it vanished into the early morning. As I lay back into my tent silently sobbing and trying to fall back asleep, I hear the faint echo of the thing's cry. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night and refused to set foot in those woods again. As we left the campsite that day, we saw a homeless-looking woman standing at the side of the road going down the mountain. I didn't make eye contact, but I knew she was staring at me. Once we passed, I casually looked over my shoulder to see if she was there, and she wasn't. But there was an owl who flew close to the ground to where she was.
As a disclaimer, we were all under a lot of stress, so it's quite possible that our minds were playing tricks or making things seem like more than what they were. But know this, the events that unfolded here terrified me, beyond a reasonable doubt. Backstory, these events unfolded after I evacuated the Panama City area due to Hurricane Michael. My apartment was destroyed and I had little other places that I could go, so I went to my aunt's new house while awaiting further word. I was staying with my aunt, Sabrina, her boyfriend, Frank, his son, Ted, and my younger cousin, Keith, in a fairly large house in northern Tennessee. They were just moving in when I arrived, in fact, and I was helping them move furniture and the like inside during my month-long stay. It started out simply. Certain rooms would be colder than others, and a heavy feeling seemed to follow you throughout the house. You weren't even aware that the house was properly haunted until about 2 weeks into living there. I was sitting in the downstairs sitting room with Ted, playing 7 Days to Die on his PlayStation when the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. Everyone else, for the record, was upstairs during this time. We could hear the murmur of the conversation upstairs. We exchanged a glance. "Did you feel that?" His voice wavered nervously. He nodded, slowly, and cast his glance around for an open window. It was a fruitless glance. There weren't any windows in the room. Only a fireplace, which Ted began to feel around, looking for a draft. He shook his head, his brow furrowing. Nothing. I glanced up at the vents in the ceiling and propped myself on a chair to feel them. Warm air licked my fingertips, and it was time to furrow my brow. That air is warm. We ignored it and continued to play our game. It couldn't have been playing for longer than 5 minutes when the door to the garage suddenly opened. Ted and I exchanged a glance. Suddenly, I stood and closed the door, making sure it was latched before returning to my seat. Must have not been closed all the way. We again resumed our game, but the door again opened less than 2 minutes later. It went on like this all day, the door opening as it pleased, and the room remaining mysteriously cold. The next night, Ted and I were watching a movie peacefully, with the door blocked off so it couldn't open anymore. Suddenly, we heard a scream upstairs, followed by the sound of breaking plate. We both darted upstairs to find my aunt in the kitchen, staring at the far wall in horror, her face pale as paper. The first thing I noticed was how oddly cold the floor was compared to the warmth of the air around us. "What happened?" I asked in alarm. Slowly, she began to explain what she had seen. The room temperature had dropped. Then she had seen the figure of a woman walk across the room and turn to face her before disappearing. That night, that's the moment I decided to get a hotel to the night. I briefly explained this, then rushed downstairs to the guest room to gather my things and leave. As I entered the room, the temperature again plummeted and the door slammed open with a loud bang. I didn't come back until they had the house blessed, but the spirit didn't leave until the third time they did this, with the spirit becoming more and more agitated with each blessing. The day before the third blessing, my aunt described her encounter with it the night before. The door opened and then slammed shut, and whispering filled the room. The ceiling fan began to sway back and forth as I could feel something holding me down with icy fingers. The bed began to shake, and scratches were raked down my back. It didn't leave until I begged it to stop. Saw scratches it had felt, and the bruises at her wrists and ankles. No photo proof, sadly. My only concern was to not get that same treatment, so I again stayed at a hotel, while the same house was blessed for the third and final time. After that, my house was quiet. The door no longer opens on its own, and no specters can be seen at any point. To this day, we don't know why or what it was or why it was so angry, but we do know that it is no longer in the house or on the property.
When Will It Attack Us? By Country 1989. This event took place in Alaska. Me and a few buddies from work decided to go to Anchorage to see local wildlife and wilderness. Still to this day, neither of us speak about it. So here we go. It was early September when we left Chicago, traveled up to Alaska. We flew up and over and arrived no issues. We got there and Mark, one of the guys who came, spotted a good spot on the map. We didn't care, just wanted to get things done and rolling. Fred and me feigned out after we stopped, mostly looking for easy places for shelter. Mike and Wade looked for water and signs of bear in the area. Fred pointed out a spot that he felt was solid enough for the couple nights we'd be staying. We started setting up camp, then later on, Wade and Mike showed up. But the whole time we were setting up camp, we felt like we were being watched or monitored by someone. I didn't care. Fred was a former Marine, and Mike and Wade Army. Me, just a good old boy from the Iowa woods. So not totally worried about security. So I thought. Later in the evening, the woods went quiet. Really quiet. The fire was going popping. Then, all of a sudden, we started hearing tree knocking about 800 yards away. It would start, then stop, then start on the other side of us. We thought they were bears, because, we didn't know. Fred had a sidearm, or handgun, and everyone else had an 870 to 12 gauge pump shotgun. We pulled our pieces of steel close and hunkered down for the night. 3 hours later, I woke up needing to pee. I stepped out of the tent and walked 50 feet away. Laid him out, started, As I'm in the process, I hear a deep growling coming from my right side. My eyes widened with fear, and once again I heard it on the left. I glanced over, and in the poorly lit gloom of dying campfire light, I can see a massive figure. It's huge and tall. The odor came as soon as the wind came my way. It stood on 2 legs. I was never able to see his face, but his eyes glowed like an evil red. I turned and bolted as fast as I could to the tent, made it, zipped it shut, and turned to get Fred up, but he was already awake, pistol in hand, ready to fire when needed. Fred leans in towards me and motions for me to lean as well. I did, to hear what he had to say. He stops and says, "Bro, your penis is still out. Put it away, man." I'm about to yell at him, like, "Really?" Till we hear the thing outside walking around. Thud after thud. We text Mike and Wade, so if they're up, bing, text back. Yeah, what is out there? Fred decides to tell them, lock and load, be ready to unload if it messes with you guys. Bing, 10 to 4 ready. Hours and hours went by, but we could still smell them, and every once in a while hear and move. 6 hours later, the sun comes up and no smell. We open the tents and all our food in the trees is gone. Our bags that had garbage, gone. I told Fred what I saw, but he swore up and down these were bears. Nothing else. But I know what I saw.
My aunt is a Skinwalker. By Go Cougar. I am a Spokane Native American in the state of Washington. This is a story from the perspective of my mother. I believe my long runaway aunt has become a Skinwalker. The story began with my mom and her older sister Annie. My grandpa has developed PTSD upon his return from Vietnam. After graduating from high school, Aunt Annie got a job at a local grocery store. She started dating the store's regular, a guy named Scene. Scene and Aunt Annie often snuck out at night and wouldn't return till very late in the morning. It was nothing out of the ordinary, until my mom would return home seeing strange items such as blood-covered hand tomahawks and animal skulls carved with unknown scriptures in the backyard. Growing up listening to many stories about witchcraft, the Skinwalker, and the Wendigo, like most kids in the reservation, she immediately became curious about these items. It had become obvious that the relationship wasn't as it seemed. My mom secretly returned one of our animal skulls to the tribe elder. After a thorough examination, the tribe elder told my mom that the skull was crafted to perform an ancient form of black magic to summon demonic forces. The elder, too, was getting suspicious that Annie was possibly experimenting with black magic. The incident was reported to the elder council. The council insisted whatever Annie was doing was very dangerous and shall be stopped immediately. One of the elders gave my mom his number and wanted her to be his informant, so they could catch whoever was messing with witchcraft in the reservation. When Annie arrived home,
and wanted to take my mom out for her 16th dinner birthday one evening, she ran across my drunk grandpa with a belt in his hands, ready to give my mother the beating of her life. Being the protective older sister she was, Annie stood up against my raging grandpa, pointing her fist and cursed out something that was not in our native tongue. My grandpa fell back down immediately, shaking violently as if he was having a seizure. It was almost like he was hit by a psychokinetic force. That same day, Annie wanted my mom to pack up everything and move in with her in a trailer. A few days later, Scene came knocking on the back door, demanding to see Annie. Annie picked up her backpack and headed into the backwoods with Scene. But this time, my mom decided to stalk them just to see what they were secretly doing in the woods. Scene and Annie arrived at an open space in the woods, while my mom was hiding in bushes 30 feet behind them. Scene started a bonfire, as Annie took out several animal skulls and put them in an array on the ground. They then began to dance hysterically and was chanting in an unknown language. All of a sudden, Scene and Annie fell into a trance and fell onto the ground, screaming and laughing uncomfortably, followed by a sound of bones cracking. They transformed into tall, half-deer, half-human creatures, standing on their back legs. My mom, now trembling and covered in goosebumps, pulled out her phone and started texting one of the elders about what she was seeing. With her hands shaking violently with fear, my mom accidentally dropped her phone and the noise got the creature's attention. The creatures turned in my mom's direction and started sniffing the air. It was at this moment my mom bolted out of the bushes, running back to the trailer. My mother ran all the way back to the elder's place and told him everything she saw. An hour later, several tribal elders, shaman, and a few cops arrived at the scene, but they only saw a still burning bonfire, a hand axe covered in blood, several animal skins, and a backpack full of deer skulls. She stayed with one of the tribal elder's daughters, one of her best friends from middle school. Now with my grandpa in an asylum, the tribal elders arranged my great aunt to pick up my mom and wanted her to stay with my great aunt until further notice. A few days later, my mom went back to Annie's trailer to pack up and found a note written, "I love you, Josie, my mom's name, I'm off to a better world," on Annie's bed. That was the last time Annie was heard or seen by my mom or by anyone. 2 months after Annie's disappearance, my mom got woken up by a voice calling her name during an afternoon nap at my great aunt's house. Josie. Josie. She immediately recognized it was the voice of Annie. She went out to the front door, to only see a majestic-looking doe with green glowing eyes limp walking into the front yard. This was strange, since the deer population was recorded low in the area. The doe limp walked up to my mom, and lowered its head as if it wanted my mom to pet it, which was unusual for a wild deer to do. My mom petted the deer, rubbing its chin, and then the doe ran away. My mom believed the doe was her sister, Aunt Annie. She shapeshifted into a deer and came to say her final goodbye. The term Skinwalker has become synonymous with evil over the years, since it has been depicted as an evil monster that wants to lure you and harm you. From the stories I have heard from the tribal leaders, not all shapeshifters, witch doctors, are evil. The Skinwalkers are closely worked with the tribe in ancient times. For example, the Skinwalkers would shapeshift into a bird so they could travel great distances to treat the patients, or into a bear to fight in battles, or into a fox so they could sneak into enemy camps to spy on them. In my case, my own aunt chose to become one to protect her little sister.